I'm Ann Buchan, and this is my persuasive speech on teenagers and cell phones. How many teenagers do you know that have their own cell phone? I'm the mother of a 14-year-old, and I can tell you that almost every single one of my daughter's friends has their own phone. She did as well, up until a couple months ago. I took hers away because I was tired of fighting with her and going over the rules with her that she wasn't following. In the time she did have her phone, I noticed she had developed somewhat of a dependence on it. I started to wonder if maybe she wasn't mature enough to have it, or maybe she was just too young to understand how to use it. While the phone offered a way for her to always get a hold of me, I started to see that there might be some negative aspects of it as well. I became interested in finding out if there were more negatives than positives as far as teens and phones were concerned. Cell phones add a safety element to the lives of teenagers. It gives them the capability to call an adult almost instantly if they run into trouble. Teen years are a time when kids need to start establishing independence, but it also can be nerve-wracking for parents. Letting them out into the world is scary. The advent of the cell phone has some really positive parts to it. It seems like a simple idea. Give your kid a phone and get yourself some peace of mind, but it's not that simple. All of us, not just parents, have a stake in making sure kids who have cell phones are using them responsibly. Teenage cell phone use affects all of us, from safety issues while driving, to how our own children are being treated at school, to how our kids are developing mentally and physically. Today I'd like to talk to you about teenagers and their personal cell phones and some things that will help you understand what they can do to use them appropriately. It's also important that we provide guidelines and boundaries to protect kids. I'm asking you today to think carefully before you give your teenager a cell phone to assess the benefits and the potential risks. And if you do make a decision to give them the phone, I urge you to talk to them and establish guidelines for using the phone. First, let's talk about some of the problems. Cell phones perpetuate bullying and they stunt emotional growth. An article published by Forbes magazine on the psychology of texting states that nonverbal mediated communication takes away inhibition that is there when people are talking to each other face to face. Experts are noticing a trend that texting and Facebook perpetuate bullying by making it easier to be cruel to kids because you don't have the face-to-face interaction. A study was done last year that was published in the official journal of the American Academy of Pediatrics that found that text bullying has become more commonplace in the last 2 years. The rates of victimization and perpetration on the internet steadied, but the actual text version rose significantly. Oscar Wilde has a well-known quote which says, "Man is weak himself when he talks in his own person, but give him a mask and he'll tell you the truth." Texts give us a mask that can be refreshingly honest, but also cruel and deviant. The news is full of stories of teenagers taking drastic measures as a result of bullying. In 2000, a 15-year-old schoolgirl committed suicide after not being able to handle the stress from being bullied. And in Japan, a student came close to committing suicide after incessant abusive text messages. Psychologist Sherry Turkle, author of the book Alone Together, also contends that cell phones are preventing teens from developing independence. Turkle has completed studies on what she refers to as the tethered child, who in this world of constant contact does not get the chance to learn to be alone. They don't get the experience of being independent and having to count on themselves and nobody else. She states that children are getting the phones earlier and earlier. In the years when children need to develop the capacity for solitude, they're always connected to somebody. And if you're always connected, you'll never develop the capacity for solitude and you'll always be alone. There are also physical consequences that are occurring with the use of cell phones. Teens that use cell phones after going to bed are more likely to suffer from depression and more mental health issues. They also suffer from fewer hours of sleep. Using cell phones while driving can also cause serious accidents, especially for young and inexperienced drivers. Happy slapping is another issue that combines the social problems and the physical health problems. Happy slapping is a term used to describe the phenomenon that occurred in London when teens began assaulting people that weren't paying attention and they were videotaping these things.
on their mobile devices. As the videos began to circulate and gain popularity, they became more intense because they were becoming more popular and they're going to further measures to get attention, and people began losing their lives. There's also sexting, which is sending suggestive messages via cell phone. According to the American Academy of Pediatrics, 13% engage in this form of texting, and just as many have taken part in sharing of nude and explicit photos. As community members, it benefits all of us if teens are not texting and driving, and as parents, it's critical that we're raising healthy and self-sufficient individuals. So now you can see some of the problems that are occurring with teen cell phone use, but what can we do to help fix it? Here are a couple of ideas. Parental involvement is key when it comes to teens and the use of cell phones. Parents can stay involved in several ways. Number one, pay attention to who your kids are talking to and what's going on in their lives socially. Adolescents need adult supervision to stay on track. It's easy as parents to fall into a trap of benign neglect and not realize what's going on in your kid's life. I sat down and talked with Judy Anderson, who is a guidance counselor at Pioneer Middle School. The best thing parents can do is to monitor how and when their kids are using their phones. Know who your kids are talking to and what social media they're accessing. This can help diffuse bullying before it starts. Number two, restrict use and set up parental controls. Create rules with the phone. One idea is to have kids turn their phone in at the end of the night. This eliminates them being on the phone, checking it at all hours of the night, and it also eliminates their access to the social media where a lot of the bullying seems to occur. Use your cell phone's company online tools so you can see who your kid's talking to, who they're calling, how many phone calls they're making, how many texts they're sending. You can also use the parental controls that your kids, through your cell phone company, that they have established for teen cell phone use. These programs allow you to monitor what internet sites kids are going to, how often, what type of apps they're downloading, and you can set limits on who they can call, who they can't call, how many texts they can send. You can turn it off during the day while they're at school. And then keep an open dialogue with your kids and make sure there are clear guidelines and expectations on what they're okay to do with their phone and not okay to do. So how does all of this affect you individually? I personally know of 2 people from Walla Walla who have lost their lives due to car accidents with texting or cell phone use. I knew a gentleman who just died last year, and he has a family with young kids still. And then there was another girl who was about 19, and she was texting and got in a car accident and died. Think about the world we live in, where there are frequent reports of kids killing themselves because they can't take being bullied. We all know that bullying exists, but in the past, kids got to go home at the end of the day and they got a reprieve from it. They could go home where there was no stress. But with the cell phones, with them constantly, that bullying is always there. It's heartbreaking to think that they're killing themselves and taking their lives because they can't take it. Unsupervised teens will have the ability to send each other hostile texts and Facebook messages. Judy Anderson at Pioneer Middle School also told me that at middle school age, kids lack the capability of not hitting that send button when they're in the middle of a heated exchange with another child. One text message that's sent can start a whole slew of problems for the staff. Everything I've discussed with you today should encourage you to think carefully about your teen or teens you know who have phones. We live in a day and age where cell phones are a reality. Technology has many advantages which help improve our lives, but with most of these things, there are also unintended consequences that have occurred. Today I ask you to please think carefully before giving a teenager a phone. Ask yourself, does my child really need a cell phone? And if you answer yes to that question, consider establishing boundaries for them. Be involved and know who your kids are communicating with. Even if you are not the parent of a teen, you might someday have friends and family members who have teenagers. Talk to the teenagers you know. Start a conversation with them about their phones and see if they're aware of any of these things. Talk to parents and ask the same questions. Giving teens phones really does escalate complicated social issues that already exist for them. It creates an added danger for drivers, and kids become somewhat dependent on the phone, always wanting to know who's waiting to talk to them. Parents can actively be involved by helping to eliminate some of these problems through monitoring what kids are doing on their phones. We can be conscious of how often they're using their phones and create some guidelines, like turning the phones off at night. We all are a part of the solution, and by sharing this information with other people, you can be too. Martin Cooper, the inventor of the cell phone, Martin Cooper, the inventor of the mobile phone, said people want to talk to other people, not in a house or in an office or a car. Given a choice, people will demand the freedom to communicate wherever they are, unfettered by the infamous copper wire. Our kids are a gift, and as parents, we're lucky enough to have a few years during childhood to teach them to be successful adults. The freedom to communicate unfettered by that infamous copper wire can come at a price. I urge you to think carefully before giving your teen a phone, and if you do, make sure they know how to use it responsibly. It's up to us to educate them on the risks and establish a plan to keep them safe. Do you have questions?
As a parent of a teenager who you said at the outset of your speech that you took your phone away from your teenager, did that cause you concern? Did that cause you a lack of communication with your daughter that you normally would have felt under those circumstances?
It initially did, because I was so used to being able to call her instantly. But one of the things I learned when I started researching this topic, that the cell phone use with the kids in their dependence on it is just as harmful as it is to them as it is to us as adults, because we're not allowing them to get the space and independence they need in their maturation process. So it's not healthy for me to be calling her every 10 minutes or wanting to know where she is. And it's not good for her either. At this age, they're supposed to begin to separate. In this phone, that's where that term, the tethered child, comes in. They are tethered to us and to other people when they need to be learning independence.
Do you think the lack of civility that characterizes online exchanges has bled over into regular conversations, that we're not as civil as we used to be, and maybe in part that's because of the rise of electronic communication?
I think so. That would just be my opinion. You see it in the way people email back and forth, and the use of the written word, grammar, and the way you present your thoughts in writing seems to be more lax, and I think that may be true with face-to-face communication now too.
Social life is so important to teenagers. It is their life. And what do you see as the consequences of a child, like your own as an example, who has had her cell phone use taken away or extremely limited? What kind of consequences have you seen from the lack of being able to use a cell phone?
She feels left out to a certain extent because, well, I'm not going to say all of the other kids. There are a few kids I know of that don't have them, that their parents don't allow them to have their own personal cell phones, but most of the kids do. So because she can't have her phone now, when she goes with them, she'll use their phone to call me, or she'll use their phone to get in contact with me. She doesn't have her own. And I think she's a little bit embarrassed about that. And it would be nice for her to be able to get a hold of me with her own phone, but I do think that there are a lot more negatives than there are positives, and I just think it's a better choice. I've noticed a lot of changes with her ever since that phone's gone away.
So it's a positive social change, not a negative social change?
I think it's a negative, well, I don't know that negative social change, there's some negative aspects to it. It hasn't changed things negatively, but there's some things like she's embarrassed about it. However, she's not also caught up in as much drama. She's not coming out of her room in the morning in a bad mood because of some inner exchange that could have taken place with other kids the night before, and she doesn't want me to know about it because she shouldn't have been on her phone. It's just made life a lot easier, and I think she's happier. She wasn't at first. She went through a lot of withdrawals, but she's happier now. Anyone else?
Do you think that the kinds of things that you ascribe to younger folks using cell phones in particular, but electronic media in general, in your experience, do adults have some of the same issues with them? And could you talk about that?
And you're just asking about in my experience. I haven't done a ton of research but about adults in this situation, but in my experience, I would say yes. I know so many people that are my age in their 30s, and they're attached to that cell phone, always checking Facebook, always checking email. They have to know what's going on all the time, and it's like almost like a security piece that people carry on them now, from my experience.
What about the GPS aspect of the cell phone, where you can actually track where your kids are based on where their cell phone is?
You can't, yeah, that's a